All right, everybody, the Joint Subcommittee on Coastal Flooding and Adaptation will come to order for our October meeting. It looks like we've got a fairly good attendance, which is nice to see. I was at the Manufacturing Commission meeting last week here in Richmond, and we had 3 people physically show up. So it's kind of hard to transact business because, as you all probably know, under the rules, in order to do anything, to take any action, we need an actual quorum physically present here. So glad to see everybody making an effort, and I know there's some last-minute hiccups with some of our members, too, who are going to be joining us virtually or watching the live stream. So we've got, you can see the agenda is pretty robust agenda, and we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Delegate Keem. Delegate Keem,
Yeah, present.
thank you, Delegate. Delegate Askew.
Present.
Delegate Hodges. Delegate Ranson. Senator Kiggins.
Here.
Senator Locke. Andrea McClellan.
Here.
Chris Stone.
Here.
Joseph Bouchard. Vice Chair Converse Fowler. Chair Lewis.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, so we've got some good attendance. We have a robust agenda here with a lot of meaty subject matter, so I think we best straight get to it. And first up on our agenda is an update from Rear Admiral Ann Phillips on the Coastal Master Plan. Ann?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Sean is going to do my slide flipping for me. I'm going to take off my mask. I think it'll be a little easier to talk. They are there. We do have them. We promise. Yep. I'll get started. The first slide is probably familiar to many of you, and it is the front cover of the framework document. As I get started, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce some staff members from the Department of Conservation and Recreation who are assisting with the master plan development and will continue that work within the Department of Conservation and Recreation, where the master plan will ultimately reside. They are the program manager for the master plan, Mr. Matt Dallin, who is here today. And we also have a program coordinator, Mr. Connor Winstead, who has not joined us this afternoon. And also with me this afternoon is Mr. Matt Jones, Virginia Management Fellow, assigned to the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources and working with us on the master plan and process. We've also recently said farewell to Ms. Cherie Zhang, Sea Grant Fellow, who, as you know, the Sea Grant Fellows have been very much a part of this process all the way along. Cherie's headed off to bigger and better things in New York, but she was instrumental in a lot of the work that we will talk about here today. So, a quick background on where we are with our master planning process. As you are aware, we released an RFP in December of 2020, worked through negotiations to award a contract in March of 2021 this year, and have been working with Dewberry and their team ever since to create a first iteration of a coastal master plan for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Today, what I'd like to go over is how we came to this point, what the background and supporting documentation are, how we have identified and studied coastal hazards, built a project database, which was one of our goals and objectives, developed evaluation criteria that we will use now and in the future to consider impact and need, building on gaps that have been identified in both data, analysis, research, and an actual project and implementation processes, and then talk about the challenges of funding as we move forward, and how we would like to also develop a sustainable public planning process to seek continued public input and engagement as we move forward. Next slide, please. First, to remind, I know many of you have been on this committee and long serving and are aware of these documents in particular, but the concept of a coastal master plan was initiated by Executive Order 24 in November of 2018. It also directed setting of state standards for sea level rise scenario planning and elevation requirements for state-owned buildings in the context of future construction. Moving forward to Executive Order 45, which was signed in November 2019, we set those standards for future planning for sea level rise, particularly selecting NOAA's 2017 intermediate high scenario projections, and also setting a standard for state-owned building future construction. And then in October of 2020, we released the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan and Framework, which tells us, serves as guiding principles and objectives for how we will move forward and what we will think about as a Commonwealth in this context. Also, in the fall of 2020, Governor Northam signed Executive Order 71, which established a technical advisory committee that has been helping us, along with 7 subcommittees, work through this planning process over the course of the past year, and also signed Executive Directive 13, which elevated the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program such that it reports now directly to the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. Next slide, please. To remind, the framework's guiding principles are as you see them here. First, that we acknowledge climate change and use the best available science and engineering background to help us make decisions as we move forward as a Commonwealth. Second, to focus on socioeconomic inequities and to understand where we have opportunities to enhance and ensure capacity building and equity broadly across coastal communities so that we are all moving along together. Recognizing the importance of green infrastructure, understanding that there will also need to be gray solutions, and where we can, working hybrid solutions into the picture so we have as much of a green flavor to any gray infrastructure that we need to develop. Focusing on community and regional scale planning to the largest extent possible, realizing that solutions for a rural coastal community are very different than solutions for urban coastal communities and planning districts and regional commissions. And then lastly, understanding the fiscal realities, where is the best opportunity for us to focus to have the most long-term impact as we move forward, particularly from a funding challenge and perspective. Next slide, please. The framework's 4 goals, as identified here. First, to identify and prioritize projects to increase the resilience of coastal communities, including both built and natural assets. And I would add, we have focused on the coastal flood hazard. You'll see a little bit more about that in a minute, which means that we have not yet done sufficient analysis, and we have a plan to do so, regarding fluvial and pluvial rainfall and riverine flooding impacts on the 8 coastal planning districts and regional commissions. We are also considering possibilities to establish financing strategies as we move forward, and with Dewberry and their team have done some analysis to help localities and project owners identify federal opportunities and other grant opportunities or other funding opportunities that may help them move projects forward based on the nature of that project. And then goals 3 and 4 are broader goals to try to incorporate and promote climate change priorities across and within Commonwealth programs, across agencies and in other contexts to address coastal adaptation and protection and resilience more broadly, and then also coordinating across and between state, federal, regional, and local coastal adaptation and protection efforts. Next slide, please. In the context of developing the master plan, and this slide builds, as I mentioned, we have worked with Dewberry to understand coastal flood hazard impacts. We have, with the assistance of planning districts, regional commissions, and localities, and other stakeholders, built a database, a coastwide database of projects, and also looking at the impacts, understand where we have needs to move forward, including capacity needs. We have developed a process by which we can evaluate projects now and in the future to try to focus on what our priorities should be, and then again, try to align funding to some of those projects to start to make progress as we move forward. Next part of this slide, actually a 3-part build, go ahead and build the whole thing. We've short-term priorities. We know we need to do more rainfall, inundation, and compound flooding work to fully understand the natural hazard impact that we're dealing with. Capacity building is a key priority across communities in coastal Virginia. We've learned that. We knew that to be the case. We've heard it again as we visited those communities. And you'll hear more about that context when Mr. Dow Glover speaks to you shortly on the Virginia Community Flood Preparedness Fund. We're also identifying and working towards developing long-term needs and a strategy to keep this process moving through the future. Again, folding in funding requirements as we move forward so that we develop an iterative public planning process that we can sustain over time, learning and improving with each successive iteration. In the framework, we highlighted a potential for a 5-year annual update. That may be the right timeline, that may not be the right timeline, but that was an initial estimate as to how we should move forward. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about the flood impact analysis that Dewberry and their team have done. We broke this down into 9 flood events, from mean low and mean high water up to the 500-year flood event, and then analyzed them against the 2017 NOAA intermediate high sea level rise scenario projections. and looked at them in the context of the years 2020, 2040, 2060, and 2080, because some work had already been done by the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resilience using those timeframes. We will add the year 2100 at the request of the City of Norfolk. We're working on that now, sorting out the contract requirements, but taking it that extra step gives communities in the community rating system a little bit of information that they need to further qualify and improve their rating with FEMA in that context. So this is the 2020. We based it on last year because we had to start with something. And again, this does not show flood coverage. This shows the area that could be flooded should the event, as depicted here, 100-year flood, 500-year flood, occur. Next slide, please, is the year 2080, same area. And I would bring your attention to and some of you have seen this slide before, but to the yellow arrow on the graph on the side, which shows that within 60 years, or in 60 years approximately, what is now the 100-year flood, or the flood that we would anticipate having a 1% chance of recurrence in any given year, will become the 2-year flood. So we could expect that level of inundation caused by a number of natural hazard circumstances. We have a 50% chance of having that happen in any single year. So that's a substantial increase in risk, depending on where you are, and drives home the need to continue this work and how serious this is, depending on where you are in the Commonwealth. I chose the Hampton Roads region, showing a little bit also of the Middle Peninsula and Hampton and Newport News, because we know that the Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck, Hampton Roads, and Eastern Shore are the 4 most impacted planning districts and regional commissions of the 8 coastal planning districts and regional commissions in coastal Virginia, everything east of I-95. That doesn't mean there aren't impacts in other places. There are, but the most significant impact are in these regions. And again, to remind, this is just the coastal flood hazard impact. This does not include rainfall. This does not include rainfall impact on these scenarios, just the coastal flood hazard. Next slide, please. So this is an approximation based on Dewberry's analysis of the amount of land across the 8 coastal planning districts and regional commissions, land, people, and buildings that will be impacted by additional flood impacts and hazards over the next 60 years, working towards the high end in 2080, based on what the hazardous impact assessment and analysis Dewberry has done, using NOAA's 2017 intermediate high scenario. Again, it doesn't mean that land will be flooded all the time, but it means it's going to see a lot more water a lot more often. I spoke of rainfall. Next slide. Many of you in this room and on the dais are aware of this, but we were able to partner this year, fortunately, with the Chesapeake Bay Trust through the Urban Stormwater Planning Work Group, which is led by Norm Goulet of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, on a project they already had planned or were beginning to fund to update rainfall intensity, duration, and frequency modeling for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We were able, with the help of Mart Luckenbach, who's here in the room, to put together the rest of the funding required to do the entire state. VTRC also contributed, as did ODU. So ODU and VIMS under CCRFR and VTRC funded the bottom half of the Commonwealth, and this is now known as the Chesapeake Bay and Virginia rainfall intensity, duration, and frequency modeling. What you're looking at here is, first of all, you can see from the website, you can go in and look at this yourself, but looking at Norfolk under Representative Concentration Path 8.5, which is essentially the do-nothing scenario for carbon emissions, from the years 2050 to 2100, we can expect, looking at the median value, about an 18% increase in rainfall in the Norfolk area. So the darker the blue, the more of the increase, as an entering argument in looking at this data. So this data was done for RCP 4.5, which is an intervention scenario where we have less increase in carbon emissions, but the story isn't really a lot different. In any context, we're going to see a lot more rain in coastal Virginia, across the Commonwealth, particularly up in the Shenandoah Valley region, and so we should plan for this as we move forward because we know it's coming. And as I've mentioned, we know the next step in analysis for impact for our coastal flooding work in the context of a master plan is to include this rainfall impact in that analysis to have much better understanding of vulnerability and impact to critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. We did not only look at vulnerability in the context of natural hazards, we also, using the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, looked at social vulnerability from the perspective of income, age, health, transportation access, language, and a number of other factors. And then juxtaposed social vulnerability, and this is all using 2019 census data, American Community Survey. It is not the 2020 census data. It could be in the future. We just don't have enough of it yet to add it. And it is not projected in the context of the social vulnerability. In other words, we're not projecting social vulnerability into the future. We're just using the impact from CDC's index today. Dewberry was able to downscale that to the census block group level, not down to the block level. That's what we all want. That's the Rosetta Stone. Not quite there. But to show it over flood impact. So you can see as the flood impacts expand, known socially vulnerable communities today will be impacted more in the future. So if we go to the next slide, same social vulnerability level overlaid with the 2080 natural hazard coastal flood risk. And so communities that are at some risk today will be at much greater risk tomorrow. Many of you are from the Hampton Roads area. When you're looking at this slide, there is not new news in this picture. You know, you could have picked out where these communities are today. The point we're making is how much more vulnerable they will be in the future if we take no action to assist them, to protect them, to help them adapt their communities, and to make choices for their future. That really applies to everybody in Hampton Roads, Peninsula and South Side, and of course the Eastern Shore, Middle Peninsula, Northern Neck. You can see that very clearly here. And up into Northern Virginia as well. There's just fewer pockets that are challenged. So, very interesting information here, helps us identify hotspots, helps us confirm known hotspots. The challenge then becomes, okay, what do we do next? If we go to the next slide, we've been working, as I mentioned, to build a project and capacity building database. You may be aware the Coastal Zone Management Program funded work to develop a project database focused on having shovel-ready information for projects that could be funded by particularly NIFWIF and NOAA, but then that was expanded to kind of any kind of project that might be out there and worthy of consideration. The challenge with that database is that the information across the projects that were included in it was quite varied, and we were not able to use much of it as we built and worked into this coastal master plan. We were able to use, however, financial data that was accumulated and put together as a part of that project, and that forms the basis of the work Dewberry has done in the context of providing an understanding of grants that will apply to projects. So we reframed and really using Hampton Roads as an example of a database that is region-wide that we would like to make coastal region-wide. We added some additional fields, so it was not exactly the same as Hampton Roads Planning District. We were very fortunate. They were gracious enough to tolerate that because localities, planning districts, and other stakeholders ended up putting all this data into this database themselves. They entered their own projects. So what does that mean? That means that areas that had, we have kind of a scattered approach. Scattered isn't really the right word. Every area does not necessarily show projects. That does not mean they do not have any. It also does not mean they do not have capacity building needs. Planning districts such as the Northern Neck have just finished the RAFT process, Resilience Adaptation and Feasibility Tool. They are on a journey to begin to understand and build their own resilience, and that will begin with developing capacity and then working towards developing and aligning projects. Crater Planning District, same circumstance. Middle Peninsula Planning District, very focused on their Fight the Flood program and developing that as they move forward into adapting and protecting their particular planning district and region. So we know there are more projects out there, but this is showing you where we have in our database right now known projects that were entered by localities, planning districts, and other stakeholders. And by other stakeholders, that also includes, to a certain extent, projects that have come out of the joint land use studies, including our federal partners in Hampton Roads region and elsewhere. And there are projects that are entered by nonprofits where they are partnering with localities to try to accomplish either land conservation or additional work to build resilience, living shorelines, or other kinds of activities. So pretty broad swath of kinds of projects that are in this database. And again, as I said, there are 86 additional capacity building inputs that have been received. And the intent is now, this will be a living This will be a living process that will live on a web application hosted, at least in part, by DCR, and that it will be something that localities can continue to add to over time. As more projects are developed, they can place them in this database, they can continue to use it, they can see projects, and they can also see the impact and assessment and analysis that's been done. We build on that over time, we can add that as well. So everybody will have access at the locality level to be able to see and manage their own projects in this database. That's the goal. And that they can take advantage of the impact assessment and analysis that exists as well to help them in their planning for the future. So, you should note that as we've spent time visiting localities and planning districts, we've heard about stormwater repeatedly. Stormwater is a major challenge now, particularly across the coast, but also in places that are not necessarily subject to coastal flooding. Loud and clear stormwater. Almost 300 projects of the 436 have some element of stormwater mitigation involved in them, and about 100 have green infrastructure or living shoreline or other kinds of natural features as a part of their process. A significant number of the projects are hybrid, as I said before, with both, and then some are, of course, gray infrastructure. Next slide, please. To help us develop an evaluation process, we actually fell back on the framework and also using the work of Texas and Louisiana, who have done quite a bit of work in this context, kind of broke ourselves down into project classes, which you can see there, natural and nature-based, hybrid projects, and structural projects, type, and then subtypes. And then have begun to evaluate and understand what these projects are focused on based on the inputs that we've received from localities as they have entered projects into the database. Next slide, please. We've also considered and evaluated projects against these 5 factors, and if you think about the guiding principles, here they are. So there's a lot more to this. Dewberry has developed a fairly substantial matrix for how we can factor, weight, and consider projects as we move forward. But quite a bit of excellent work has been done here, and it's very much improved our knowledge and understanding of what's there, and also to some extent what's not there, which is just as important to understand as we move forward. I mentioned several times, moving to the next slide, that we have spent some time and continue to spend time engaging with the public. The contract with Dewberry and team included a number of outreach opportunities, and we have, just due to timing, not been able to take advantage of as many of them as we would like. But here's what we have done. 10 half-day workshops working with planning districts and regional commissions. We went to them. We also did a pre-workshop for each of them, 2-hour event to tell them what they might expect to help them prepare. Interesting attendance. Sometimes we had a lot of people at the pre-workshop and not so many at the actual workshop, and sometimes it was the other way around. But at every occasion, we had an opportunity to talk with practitioners in localities, in cities, in counties, and to understand what their challenges were, and in planning districts as well. We did 2 in HRPDC, a lot more interest there, a much bigger group of folks. We did 1 with federal partners, and we have set aside capacity to do 1 for our Virginia federal and state tribes, which will be done in the future as they are ready to take those kinds of next steps. The picture you're seeing is the public meeting in Hampton Roads. With each of the workshops, we did a public session that evening for the planning district. Again, widely varied attendance, but the closer we got to flood hazard areas, typically we saw more people, although that was not exclusive. And we also now are in the process through the Office of the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources of doing some more focused community level sessions. We've done 6 already, focusing on Middle Peninsula, Hampton Roads in particular, Eastern Shore, and we have 2 more that we're going to do up at George Washington at their request, to try to get down to a community level and get more input from community members on the challenges that they're seeing on the ground where they live. We've also done 2 significant surveys and have been fortunate to have the Environmental Defense Fund help us get the word out for a lot of those, and also to have others throughout the Commonwealth agencies and other stakeholders get the word out on these. There were 2 surveys done, a centralized survey, which is taking input from practitioners in the context of their professional capacity, so stormwater managers, floodplain managers, city employees, and then also a public survey, which we have 1,200 and counting inputs from the public broadly, and it is broadly spread across the 8 coastal planning districts and regional commissions. There's not, some certainly have more influence than others, but there's quite a broad stakeholder input there in the public surveys. What we got from these, and the public survey is still open, by the way, is quite a bit of interest in education, in funding, and stormwater. Hit the bell again, and a lot of interest in long-term plans and strategies, but also an interest in short-term, wanting to see action and wanting to see projects that they knew were planned start to move forward. So interesting perspectives, both from the centralized, the practitioners, and from the general public, and in many cases they were more aligned than you might have thought. So more to follow here. There's a whole wealth of data to be mined as we continue our public planning process with folks. But we were heartened to see the participation that we did get, and of course the challenge for us as the new administration comes along is how to build this back into a sustainable outreach and engagement process where we can continue to reconnect with communities. So we will be working on that as we move through the fall so that we can have something in place as we present our plan. Next slide. Just to update you on schedules. First, I should add that of the 7 subcommittees, project identification, evaluation, science research, and best practices, finance, all the chairs, I think, of all of those but one are in this room. So it's people you know. We also have an economic impact, economic development subcommittee, an outreach and engagement subcommittee. So quite a bit of activity going on here through members of the technical advisory committee who have met nearly monthly for the last 8 months or so to try to help advise us as we move forward with this document. In addition, the TAC has met 5 times. I think the 6th time will be next Thursday, this coming Thursday, and we are to the point now where we are beginning to consider recommendations from that body that we will move forward in the document and hopefully move forward into actions and activities for the future of the Commonwealth. We expect to finish the draft document revisions by late October. Dewberry, going back and forth with Dewberry, who's helping us write this, staff the document through Commonwealth review processes largely through the month of November and then release in December of 2021. Next slide, please. So a few pictures from our outreach and public sessions from across the Commonwealth, Eastern Shore, Richmond, and that looks like Hampton Roads. And with that, I will close and thank you all for your attention and ready to entertain your questions. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ann. That was great. A lot of work going on there. How realistic do you think having something in December is?
I think having something in December is very realistic. The point I will make here is this is the first step. And what we need to lay out in addition to what we present in December is what are the next steps? And how can we keep going? And how can we ensure that work is sustained through changes of administration, irrespective of what they might be? They don't matter. This work is necessary and it must continue.
And that's my second, not so much a question as an observation. We've got, what, three executive orders here surrounding the master plan, and executive orders are only as good as long as you have the executive
until
there.
Rescinded, yes.
Right. Yeah. All right. Any questions for Ann?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. McClellan?
Thank you. Thank you, Admiral. Curious about the database that you reference. It's only as good as the data that's put in, the inputs.
Exactly.
My concern is the comment was made that localities can add projects in the future, but they don't have to. And so how do we create a system where there's some sort of, I don't know if we can require it or not, but and also how do they update them? If projects, 1 through 82 are put in. Once they're completed, are they graded? Is there input that way as well?
So how we would evaluate projects in the long term, what do we do when they're completed? Do we put them in a different part of the database? That's all something to be determined as we move forward. But it's a very good point, because projects that are now in the database that have been entered by localities span the range of projects that are envisioned, possibly under engineering design, nearly complete, fully funded. The whole scale is there. So prioritizing against that and deciding how you want to focus there is a bit of the challenge. You're exactly right. What people put in does impact the way a project is evaluated. of course. We understand that, and now that we've done it, we understand that even more. The other challenge for the future is, as you say, convincing localities that they want to stay with this. So we have some options. I mean, you can have a stick, which is typically not effective. Carrot's probably more effective. And so the carrot is, what is there that we can say, do you get extra credit? And this is not the case at the moment, but do you get extra credit with the Community Flood Preparedness Fund if your project is in this database? Do you get extra credit for something else if your project is in this database? And the other thing for localities is they have to be able to, the goal, the objective is that this is something that they can use so they don't have to do this themselves. So they don't have to create their own database. So they don't have to create their own management system. But it has to add value for them. If it's not adding value for them, they're going to get bored with it very quickly, and why should they bother? One city alone has 150 projects in here. They were put in by one person. So it can be done, but how many times are they going to update that if they don't see value in it and an opportunity for them as a locality to get some benefit from this? So all terrific questions, all things that we are to some extent working through now, and then where we can't make additional progress, we will lay out what we think should be done as we move forward.
Mr. Chairman, I would just a comment. I'd like to thank Admiral Phillips for all the work he did on this. I mean, it was a phenomenal effort.
We're not done.
I know that.
Okay.
But it was also done with a very, very small team, and had it not been for you, I'm not sure it would have been accomplished at all, quite frankly. So I want to kind of get your thoughts on going forward. What do you think about the continuation of the Technical Advisory Committee? What are your thoughts on a funding stream or source for continuing this effort? And then what additional studies might be needed before the next 5 years before we update the plan?
So there's a lot of, the list of additional work needed is growing by the minute. And the TAC, I would say, for answer to a lot of those questions is please listen in on the Technical Advisory Committee on Thursday, because we're going to talk about the future of the TAC, and we're going to solicit recommendations from those who have been a part of it and have been managing it and live in it for the past 8 months or so. And we will, from them, derive how we think we would like to move forward with this. There will be a need, if you want to continue this work, for it to live, there's so my position is in code, it will stay. How a future administration chooses to use it is up to them. But if you want this work to continue, you probably need more than 2 people in DCR and me and a fellow. So what that should be and what that should look like will be up to the Commonwealth to decide, and I'm sure the TAC will make some recommendations and has some opinions. We'll see what we get from that on Thursday. But just kind of stepping back more broadly, there are other examples in the Commonwealth of different ways to manage this, and some are effective and some are challenged, but this issue is not going to go away. We're not going to avoid it. We can, at our peril, not present an aligned approach, a prioritized approach, an equitable approach to move localities and planning districts and communities along together as a Commonwealth. And we'll find that those who have capacity will keep moving forward, and those who don't will be left behind. Eventually, that's going to be an impact to our economic development and stability, and we won't like that when it happens. So that's the justification for moving everybody along together.
Sean? Someone have a question in the...
Mr. Chair, it doesn't look like...
No. Chris, did you have anything else?
No, Mr. Chair, that's it. Thank you.
Jen, Alex? All right, Ann. Thanks a lot. Great
Thank you,
work.
Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Glad
Stay
you're
with
here.
it.
All right, next up, we're going to get an update on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and that's Daryl Glover with DCR.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Daryl Glover. I'm the Deputy Agency Director at DCR for Dam Safety, Floodplain Management, and Stormwater Conservation. Before I begin, I'd like to let the committee know that either tomorrow or later this week, Governor Northam is going to make an announcement through a press release regarding the first round of Community Flood Prevention Fund awards. So out of respect for that, I'm not going to get into details about what he is about to announce. However, I can give you some other information regarding how we got to where we are. There have been 3 regional auctions so far, regional greenhouse gas initiatives, one in March of this year, which resulted in $19.5 million coming to the Community Flood Prevention Fund. Out of that, $18 million for potential grants was set aside. The remainder was used to help fund both staffing and the master plan effort, as Admiral Phillips has detailed. The second auction was in June of this year. It yielded $20.3 million, of which $17 million has been set aside for grants, and the remainder, again, for the administrative expenses, as I explained. That second round will close on November the 5th. The first round closed on September the 3rd. And the most recent auction in September yielded $23.7 million to the Community Flood Prevention Fund. That third round has not yet been scheduled because that third round for the first time is not just going to be grants, it's also going to include loans, and DCR will be working with the Virginia Resource Authority to develop those guidelines in particular for the loan portion of this program. Each round of the flood fund, as we have nicknamed it, involves a public comment on the grant manual. Those are the guidelines that are used to determine how eligibility is required and the expectations of applicants. For this first round that closed on September the 3rd, 32 applications were received, requesting a total of $14.5 million in flood fund grants, which included $6.2 million in low-income grant requests. The total value of those 32 applications, including the match that is required, was $23.2 million. Of those 32 applications, 17 of them were for planning and/or capacity building, and 15 of them were for actual projects, either entirely nature-based or hybrid projects. What's going to happen this week is that the awards that have been approved will be announced. For those first round applicants that are not yet approved, we are not denying those applications. Rather, we are conducting follow-up meetings with each of them in order to tell them how they can improve their application, which will be considered provided it's resubmitted and amended by the November 5th deadline for the second round. So not all of the funds that have been set aside for grants are going to be awarded this week, but those applicants will have a second opportunity to improve their applications and be considered along with the second round. With regards to capacity, Admiral Phillips mentioned that. That is quite correct. We cannot do all of this work with the limited number of staff, but we are about to hire several additional floodplain staff, primarily funded through the RGGI Fund, and that will help us to deal with our own capacity to accomplish this work. Those are the end of my brief remarks, Mr. Chairman. Be happy to entertain your questions.
Any questions for Mr. Glover? Chris, have you got one?
I do have one, Mr. Glover, thanks. I was reading through the grant manual, and I know there's a lot of discussion about having a resilience plan that has to be approved before a locality can apply for a grant. And I know that's a real challenge for some of the smaller communities that don't have the staff to be able to put those resilience plans together. So I have two questions. One is that, is there a plan for DCR to help those smaller localities, number one? And number two, the resilience plan in the grant manual talks about using current flood maps, but as Admiral Phillips pointed out, we're looking at, precipitation that's could be 20% higher going forward, and if those projects don't take that into account, are we not using funds to build something that is inadequate the day that it is built?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stone, you only need a resilience plan if you are actually applying for a project grant at this time. If you are looking for a grant for either capacity or planning, you do not yet need a resilience plan.
Okay. How about the second issue of future states instead of the current flood maps? That's what's in the grant manual right now.
Well, I mean, every for those localities that need to do some planning, that would be part of that planning. So the grants that we can provide, they can either expand their own capacity to do some of this work and or hire contractors such as Dewberry or others to do this work for them. That is part of the planning and capacity aspects of the fund.
Okay.
Ms. McClellan?
Thank you, Mr. Glover. This is exciting. I can't wait for that announcement. You mentioned that there were $14.5 million in requests from grants, but the first quarter generated $19.5 million. So the grants requests were actually less than the proceeds of the auction for that quarter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How are we educating municipalities on the availability, number one? Number two, are the grants available for regional projects, recognizing in the master plan there's a focus on region and watershed-based projects? How does that correlate to the actual grant applications?
Well, with respect to how we're making localities aware, as Admiral Phillips mentioned, there have been a number of public meetings, not just about the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, but also about the fund. With respect to regional applications, we have received some regional applications, such as from PDCs. So that is, a PDC can also be considered a community. It's not just a single locality.
That's great. And do the applicants have to be coastally geographically oriented, or could this be statewide?
They do not have to be coastally located. Matter of fact, we have one applicant that I can immediately think of from Central Virginia.
Great. Thank you.
And that's a question I have. So you say you've got one applicant from Central Virginia, but do you have more applicants from other areas of the state where it's not so much a coastal thing?
No, the vast majority are coastal applications for this first round.
But do you think there's an awareness out in the western part of the state? I mean, do we need more outreach out there, or?
I think that awareness is growing. We have been focusing our outreach within the coastal area primarily so that we can reach the low-income communities through these follow-up meetings that Admiral Phillips mentioned. There have been 12 scheduled so far for this year. 6 have been completed, 6 are ongoing. There are 20 more scheduled, planned, not yet scheduled, for next year.
Okay, great. And you mentioned you were bringing on some staff with the administrative money coming out from the auctions. I mean, how many folks are you all bringing on, do you know?
We are about to hire 5 additional floodplain planners to go along with the existing staff that we have.
Good. And are you all still, I know you're getting ready to, the governor's going to make an announcement in the next day or two, but are you still massaging, working on the guidance and the rules insofar as the project applications go, or have you got a final set of in mind in the guidebook?
Well, with any new program, I've learned over the years, Mr. Chairman, you learn as you go. And so we have seen some things, we have learned some things through this first round of applications that we need to amend in what will be the third round of grants. And so with every iteration of the grant manual, we will be making some tweaks to it, as we see things through the applications we've already received.
And not to get too deep in the weeds here, but when you all deny an application, do you let the person know or let the applicant know what the denial was based on?
As I mentioned, Senator, we are not denying any of the first round applications. We are going back to each of those applicants and giving them an opportunity to amend their application so that it can be reconsidered.
And if an applicant for a project is in a low-income community, but is not per se low-income, how is that treated within the application process?
That is precisely one of the issues that we are going to be amending the grant manual to address going forward. Okay. We have seen some inconsistencies in the interpretation of low income.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair.
I'm
sorry.
Yeah.
Another quick question.
Sure.
A couple of things. The 5 additional floodplain managers that are brought on, do we have a climatologist in your group?
No, we do not.
And how are the applications, the grants? What's the decision process for that? I know we have the framework, or I'm sorry, I'm using framework a lot. Whatever the manual is, who is the deciding? What is the group that makes that decision? What's the process for that?
Well, the ultimate recommendation comes from the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources. The staff within the DCR, Division of Dam Safety and Floodplain Management, make a recommendation that then goes through myself and the DCR Director, Clyde Chrisman, then to the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, and then that's passed forward to the Governor.
Any other questions? All right, Mr. Glover, thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, next up, we're going to have a briefing on the JCOT study. Professor Goodall? He's virtual, yeah. Can you hook him up?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mr. Goodall. Thank you. I'm going to bring up your slides presently.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let me share my slides with you, and hopefully you're seeing those come through now.
Yep, we see them here, Mr. Goodall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be in Richmond with my schedule, but thank you for the opportunity to hear about this report that we wrote. So this is a report that we wrote through the Virginia Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I was one of the co-chairs of the report. Many of the members of the committee are actually in the room today, so you'll see that slide coming up in a moment. If you're not familiar with the Virginia Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, this is a nonprofit in Virginia that includes all the members of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, as well as additional members elected within the state. And the way this functions is at the national level, when there's a thorny issue, if you will, that the nation's struggling with, such as climate change impacts on coastal areas, for example, a study board is formed to study that issue and to summarize it and report some recommendations. So the Virginia Academy is one of the few state level academies that is really being set up to do something similar for the Commonwealth. So this is the background for where this report comes from. So it was actually motivated by this House Joint Resolution number 47. And so we were tasked here with understanding and studying the safety, quality of life, and economic consequences of weather and climate related events on coastal areas in Virginia. So these are the board members for this study. And so again, Rear Admiral Phillips is on this list. And so it's great to hear her update on the framework today, as well as many others. I believe some that are in the room, if the camera works well, and I can see, I think some of the familiar faces in the room as well today. So this represents a cross-section of people, both academics like myself. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia in civil engineering, and I study flooding and water resources. We had coastal expertise. We had folks from planning districts and from government, from the port. So we try to get a cross-section of individuals that are working on this topic, but maybe haven't spent a lot of time talking together to come up with these recommendations for the report. So I just want to introduce quickly the report and then go over the recommendations with you. So the report itself is really meant to first talk about the science for climate change as best as we understand it. And then we're really focused on the impacts to Virginia. So not so much strategies for mitigating climate change, but more on understanding what the current impacts are and what our best understanding of future impacts will be, both for rural and for urban areas. We broke those out as separate chapters. The report was written through a number of conversations. I think we had somewhere on the order of 6 or so conversations among the board members, and then a lot of time writing as well to work on the report. A lot of our conversations were around the last 2 chapters of this report. So perspectives for decision making. So this is, as I said before, a very thorny and difficult issue. So we laid out what we think are some of the most difficult things to think about around climate change impacts on coastal areas. So that's chapter 5. And then chapter 6, and this was something that was asked for by the JCOTS committee chair, Delegate Hayes. He really did want us to come up with recommendations as well. So we spent a lot of time as a group discussing and coming up with recommendations. The report is available online, and if you would like a hard copy, I'd be happy to get that for you, but you can get a digital copy on the Virginia Academy's website at that link. And I believe you guys have these slides, so you can get that link and view the report. Now, this is a slide I include in this talk. I've been giving this talk to a number of different groups, and sometimes people might want an example of what an impact would be. I realize this room probably doesn't need an example, but the point here is it courses the sea level rise, which everyone thinks about. Admiral Phillips did a great job of talking about this more intense and frequent storms, and I'm very pleased to see this work to update these IDF curves, these rainfall projections for the future. That's going to be really, really important. It's also temperature increases, of course, all of this playing together. And the water system is very complicated. And saltwater intrusion into groundwater is happening because it's tied to the sea level, right? And drinking water impacts because a lot of people are dependent on drinking wells. Agricultural impacts in part because, again, irrigation of crops from water that might become brackish. Septic system impacts is something that came up multiple times, and this is what the picture is depicting here. As that sea level rise increases, as the sea level increases, the water table will also increase. Septic systems that obviously need some space to drain that waste before it hits the water table, they could be compromised, and we could have a lot of issues with failing septic systems. And I understand from the committee and our discussions that this is already happening in some places in Eastern Shore. More rural, for more urban focused areas, as many of you probably know, Norfolk has, there's a report that was talking about 50% of its stormwater infrastructure design capacity is lost because of sea level rise. In more rural areas, there's ditch drainage networks that just remain full and therefore aren't able to capture that rainfall runoff from streets as they were originally designed to do. That just the groundwater table's high enough that they don't drain effectively. And Virginia Beach is estimating the cost about $26 million per year. So many more impacts were documented in the report. Just one slide just to summarize some of these impacts. So let me now spend a little bit of time going over the recommendations from the report. And I'll say up front, as I said earlier, I'm an engineering professor. So some of these are things I'll try to describe as best as I can, but there's others on the board and in the room that could probably provide additional detail if there are questions about these. And of course, the report goes into more detail on each one of these recommendations. So that said, the first one is to establish a structure for more effective collaboration and coordination. So this came up multiple times in the study report that climate change impacts are so cross-cutting that we need new structures for coordination and collaboration. So this not only within government, but between government, business, and academia. But within government itself, we actually have a recommendation here modeling something that existed before, the Council on Virginia's Future. We think a model like that could be an effective way for thinking about climate change more holistically over the Commonwealth. So this would be something that would be chaired by the governor, legislative leaders and citizen members would be involved, and really thinking about Commonwealth-wide strategic plans across different agencies. And we think this has come up already in this meeting, it's not just a coastal Virginia problem. Of course, climate change, it's being felt there most acutely right now, and I think it will be in coming years. And so it makes sense that a lot of focus is on the coastal areas, but to the extent we can think about this as an entire Commonwealth challenge, I think that will be wise for the long term. Second recommendation is really to think about and address gaps in policies and procedures. So to extent that we can think about opportunities for budgetary policy and procedures for climate change impacts, just looking over state agencies and seeing what opportunities we have to provide more equitable opportunities for all stakeholders involved, and also to incorporate and facilitate feasible resilience strategies through policy and procedure. So there's a number of different examples for this that are provided within our report that I'll refer you to, but topics such as floodplain management risk are places where we think there's opportunities for this analysis of gaps in policy and procedure. The third recommendation is to create a body to coordinate and support critical data collection and technology transfer. So we acknowledge there is a lot of data that's being collected already, but there probably are opportunities to pull that data together. I know the Admiral Phillips just talked about a project database. There's a lot of sensor data, for example, talking about water level changes over time, rainfall data that's being collected by different entities, and there's opportunities to pull that data together and collect it to the benefit of the Commonwealth. So to do this, we actually think that there should be something along the lines of a climate change and resilience resource center. And this could be something that would be formed with a board of directors that are drawn from planning districts, also local governments, also university representation, potentially nonprofits and private firms as well could be represented on this board. And they would be really charged with synthesizing different research and development efforts, as well as data collection and synthesis of data. And there could be opportunities for this board to also identify opportunities for obtaining funding from federal sources, for example, to support some of the work, but also maybe prioritizing some research efforts at the state level. And the last recommendation here is focused more on the economic innovation potential for resilience. So it is to provide a meaningful economic innovation and incentives to build a resilience economy in Virginia. So we actually see this as an opportunity. So Virginia is a leader in this space. And if we can foster that leadership and continue to grow economic innovation along the lines of resilience, this could be a benefit not only for our own Commonwealth, but for others as well. So to do that, we think that there could be opportunities for incentivizing startups. We know that some of this is already happening through efforts like RISE within the coastal area of Virginia. We think there's opportunities to partner between university researchers and startups to bring some of the research we're doing into practice around resilience and flood mitigation. I think universities and colleges as well could create new workforces around this resilience economy. So seeing this as an opportunity to grow jobs as well. We acknowledge in our report, we know there's a lot of efforts already along these lines, and we want to just support those and grow them. So Go Virginia being one example as well. So along these same lines, not only just building economic innovation, but also the incentive side of this. So how can we explore making incentives available not only for these larger cities that are pretty far along the path for coming up with resilient solutions, making them available to smaller communities as well that are addressing needs that probably aren't happening within urban areas. So septic systems as an example, along with drainage ditch networks that I talked about earlier. So making sure that there's not a concentration just for urban problems, but we think about rural problems as well. So that is the report that we wrote. Again, that's available on the Virginia Academy's website. My co-chair in this was Antonio Ellis, who's a National Academy member, and the president for the Virginia Academy is Jim Ayler. I put their contact information on this slide too. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them now if there is time, but you can reach out to any of us and we'd be happy to provide more detail to you on this report. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you for the time.
Great. Thanks, Professor Goodall. Anybody got any questions for Professor Goodall? Chris?
So Dr. Goodall, thank you very much. I have to give a shout out to UVA. It's where I got my master's degree in civil engineering, so didn't want to let that go by. Of your 4 recommendations, realizing that some of these recommendations are going to require action from the General Assembly, do you have a top priority of the 4?
It's a good question. I don't want to speak for the board, but I would say that we've maybe ordered them with the first one. The first one is the one we talked about the most, and I think this coordination and collaboration one is an important one. So if I was forced to think about rank order, I maybe would think about the first one as being the most important. I don't know if my co-board members would agree with that necessarily, but I think there is a real need and opportunity for just coordination, getting on the same page, and moving forward. And I think some of the things that Admiral Phillips was talking about are getting us there, but maybe there's a additional opportunity to really formalize it.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else for Professor Goodall? Nobody? All right, thanks so much. Enjoyed it. Good work.
All right, thank you very much.
I skipped over Lance Gregory, who's going to brief us on septic work in coastal Virginia with the Department of Health. So, Mr. Gregory.
Chairman Lewis and members of the committee, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you today about some funding opportunities that we now have at the Department of Health, and actually probably pretty timely to go after that presentation, dealing with septic systems and private wells. I'm certain that as members of this committee, y'all are aware of the impacts and have heard about the impacts coastal flooding is having on septic systems and private wells, as we just saw in that last presentation. So I'm happy to share that we've got some opportunities to help address some of those issues. I think we have a presentation on if you were able to pull that up. And while that's getting pulled up, I just want to start off, give a little summary of kind of where we're at in issues that we're seeing with well and septic in the Commonwealth. And next slide, please. So just to give a little overview, there's approximately 1.1 million on-site sewage systems serving residences in the Commonwealth, and a little over 700,000 private wells serving residences in Virginia. So giving some context to how many Virginians rely on these systems. And with a septic system, it has a finite lifespan, with most of those systems lasting somewhere between 30 to 40 years before they have to be repaired or replaced. And based on U.S. Census data, we know that about 50% of those systems are at 40 years or older. So there's quite a few systems that are either in need of repair or will be in need of repair pretty soon. So we know there's thousands of systems out there that are in need of that repair. And there's also a lot of households that are living without adequate wastewater disposals, straight pipes, pit privies, and things of that nature. There was a report, and here's a cover photo from it, from the Rural Community Assistance Project, titled Still Living Without the Basics in the 21st Century. And they highlighted that these issues disproportionately impact African American households, not just in Virginia, but across the U.S. And additionally, many of the property owners in rural coastal Virginia, as you all have heard, are already dealing with this issue as a result of impacts of climate change, and we expect that to increase with time. In addition, that flooding can also impact private wells. You've heard in that last presentation, there was some discussion about saltwater intrusion, also flooding of wells in low-lying areas. While we do have private well construction standards that began in 1990, there's no ongoing sampling requirement within those regulations, so many homeowners aren't frequently sampling their private wells. And some information from the Virginia Tech Cooperative Extension has a Virginia Household Water Quality Program that provides private well testing to citizens throughout the Commonwealth. And in their 2019 report, they reported that over 40% of private wells that were tested exceeded safe levels of total coliform bacteria, and that significant percentages of wells that were tested exceeded safe levels of pH, sodium, copper, lead, and E. coli. So there are some caveats to that data. Those are homeowner collected samples, but it certainly shows that without that ongoing sampling being done by homeowners, there is some risk with those private water supplies as well. Next slide. So with that kind of general background, I think it's very exciting to hear and exciting to be able to share that we have some funding opportunities with septic and well improvements. The state budget for the American Recovery Plan Act funding included $11.5 million in funding for VDH, and we greatly appreciate the support and inclusion of that funding in the budget. The budget provides $5.75 million in FY22, and then again $5.75 million in FY23. And the language that's shown below, it shows up twice within that budget, and that's where the $11.5 million total comes from. And so this funding is to provide improvements for well and septic systems for homeowners at or below 200% of the federal poverty guideline. Next slide, please. And so these funds will be available statewide, and just to give some perspective on what that 200% of federal poverty guideline means for a household of 4 people, the family income would be $53,000 a year for an individual, $25,000, a little over $25,000 a year, just to give some perspective to what that 200% means. Next slide. So in administering these funds, the Department of Health has established 3 key objectives. The first is to improve the health of Virginians and provide additional protections to Virginia's communities through the assurance of adequate wastewater treatment and safe drinking water. And that's going to be accomplished by repairing or replacing septic systems and private wells with systems that are fully protective of public health and the environment, fully compliant systems. Also, another goal for us is to minimize the overhead and to use the greatest amount possible of that funding for in-the-ground projects. And then lastly, to prioritize our outreach to historically disadvantaged communities and hotspots identified through our Virginia Wastewater Data Viewer. So in regards to what we're looking at covering with these ARPA funds, we're going to assist property owners, again, with repairing failing septic systems, replacing straight pipes, replacing privies, and we'll do that by installing fully regulatory compliant conventional systems, alternative systems. You may have heard that term before, where rather than your conventional system with just a septic tank and drain field, you have some kind of a treatment device included in that system. Also, properly permitted alternative discharging systems or connection to public sewer where that is available and the best option. We're also exploring options for covering the ongoing operation and maintenance costs, or a portion of that, for alternative systems, because that is a barrier, especially for low-income households, to having those systems. We'll also be providing assistance to property owners in replacing inadequate private wells and properly abandoning unused wells. And so that means replacement of things like dry wells, wells that have a documented exceedance of a maximum contaminant level or other health standard, replacement of old board wells, and replacement of wells that were installed prior to our regulatory requirements. And so just as an example here, you can see a well has a deteriorated wellhead, it's a board well. Those would be the things we would be looking at trying to assist with. And again, it would be replacing with new wells or connection to public water where available. Next slide. So in terms of how we're looking at dispersing these funds, our first step in dispersing the funds is to identify some potential local partners. So we plan on providing up to 50% of this funding to local partners such as planning district commissions, soil and water conservation districts, nonprofit organizations that have a proven track record of providing well and septic grants in their local communities. We're currently working with our local health departments, also with our wastewater infrastructure work group. We recently held several roundtable meetings where we were seeking input from stakeholders and trying to identify potential partners. And what we're planning to do is hold some meetings in late October with those potential partners so they can learn more about how we're looking to set up the program, and also so they can share with us how to set the program up in such a way that is going to best position them to be successful. Next slide. So then the remainder of the ARPA funding would be distributed directly by the Virginia Department of Health. And our goal is to focus our efforts only in those areas where we don't have local partners. So the idea being, if we have a local partner that's willing to take on those funds, they can direct their efforts there, and we'll just focus on the areas where there aren't local partners that have that capacity to do the kind of outreach to get these projects in the ground. And so what we would be looking, and hopefully that will help us with making sure we have equitable distribution of these funds across the state. And for us to identify these potential projects, obviously we'll rely on our local health departments, but we're also going to be using the Virginia Wastewater Data Viewer, which is a new tool that we have available. And this data viewer was developed by the Center for Coastal Resources Management at the Virginia Institute for Marine Science at the College of William and Mary in partnership with VDH. And this is just a quick screen grab from that tool. And the data viewer took individual septic system data, repair permit data over 9 years, and created a temporal map to show hotspots where septic failures are occurring, along with some other different data layers. And so if you see on here, there's varying degrees of these red 1 square kilometer boxes, and that's highlighting those areas where we have these septic failure hotspots. Currently, this analysis has only been done east of I-95, but we are working with VIMS to expand that to the rest of the state. Next slide. And so if we zoom in a little bit and get a little bit better detail here, you can see as an example with Gloucester Point, we have some hotspots, and then if you can maybe kind of see in there, there's a yellow line which indicates sewer. And so that might help us look at, okay, this might be a good area for sewer connections as opposed to septic repairs and doing outreach about sewer connections. You'll also notice there's some varying shades of blue on this map, and that identifies areas that are expected to be impacted by sea level rise in the near future. These data layers are going to be really helpful for us in identifying the areas of most need. So where we've got impacts of climate change on top of septic system hotspots, those would be excellent targets for outreach to homeowners. Next slide. And in addition to this analysis from VIMS, the data viewer also includes communities that were directly identified by our local health departments as being in need of septic and well improvements. So this is just an example from Southwest Virginia where our local health department identified, and you can see these green polygons here. They've identified a number of communities in need, and then they answered a number of questions about whether it was issues with straight pipes, failing systems, marginal soils, and then if there was a shovel-ready project where they already had a project plan in place, they could put that information in and also identify the total cost of the project. We anticipate that some of those projects are going to exceed the funding that we have available through the ARPA funding at VDH, but we would certainly work with other partners that may have more funding available to help get those projects in the ground. And so just to share with you another grant opportunity that we have currently available and also have learned a great deal from. In January of 2019, VDH began administering a grant that we received from the Virginia Environmental Endowment with support from the Smithfield Foundation. It is part of their James River Water Quality Improvement Program. And with that grant, VEE provided VDH with $300,000, and then we received an additional $200,000 in support from the Smithfield Foundation to repair failing septic systems with nitrogen reducing systems or sewer connections. So looking at those BMPs for the Chesapeake Bay. And the program covered anyone located in the lower James watershed in Surrey County, Isle of Wight County, and James City County. And the program provides 100% of funding up to $18,000 for homeowners that are at or below 200% of the federal poverty guideline. And then we had a reduced cost share for incomes that were above that. So there was still some eligibility just at a reduced cost share. And so far, we have 29 homeowners that have completed their eligibility with a little over $400,000 earmarked for those projects. So the majority of that money has been earmarked, with a number of those projects already being installed and in the ground, and then the rest are kind of at various stages of design, permitting, and installation. But as I noted, we learned quite a bit working through this grant, and it's going to help us with allocating our ARPA funding significantly. First and foremost is just dealing with flexibility. VEE and Smithfield Foundation have been excellent in working with us and being flexible and working within the guardrails of our grant. And so learning from that, we want to make sure that we provide the same flexibility to our partners through ARPA. Also is building trust within the community. So VDH had not administered a grant in this area previously, and so it took quite a while for us to build the trust of the communities, of the service providers in the area, for them to even start bringing projects to us. And that's where we thought about giving a significant portion of this ARPA funding to local partners, because they already have that trust built. It's not going to take them time for people to be willing to come to them, whereas with us, it's going to take a significant amount of effort when we go into these new communities that aren't accustomed to having this kind of grant funding available. Additionally, working directly with the contractors as subrecipients is something that we learned when we first started working with this. We had a eligible homeowner that came to us, and because the funding that she was going to receive would be taxable income paid directly to her, it was going to increase her health care cost from $100 a month to $1,000 a month. That's obviously completely opposite of what we're trying to do in helping these homeowners. But we were able to come up with a process where we're working directly with the contractors and paying them directly when the work is completed. They take on that burden of the taxable income, and they also prefer it because they're getting the money up front. They're working directly with us, and they get paid quickly. So that process has worked very well for us, and we'll continue that on. And then the last part, just looking at the system cost, what we've seen through the pandemic is the cost of systems installations is starting to go up pretty substantially because of a number of factors, supply chain issues and the like. So we're definitely looking at changing the cap that we have for these projects much higher than that $18,000. So just a couple other grant opportunities that I'll note and want to put on your radar. As I mentioned, so we still have some of that funding available for the VEE grant if you have constituents interested in that. The US EPA also recently provided DEQ with $250,000 to fund septic repairs that would include nitrogen reduction for low-income households in what they're calling most effective basins in the Northern Neck and Eastern Shore portions of Virginia. And so these are two maps kind of showing those areas that have been highlighted. So VDH will be working with DEQ to administer those funds. And so encourage folks to come and talk to us if they live within those areas, and we're certainly happy to try and help. Also, SERCAP, which has been a really great partner for us in the past, recently announced that they have a loan program for septic and well repairs for Virginians earning below $91,000 per year. So that's another opportunity that folks have. And then another resource that we direct a lot of people to frequently is the Department of Housing and Community Development and their indoor plumbing rehabilitation program, which provides 0% interest loans that can sometimes be offset. So that's just another opportunity that we like to highlight when talking about funding opportunities. So. And I will note, next slide, one item that I didn't put in the presentation, but I think may be of interest to this committee. During the past General Assembly session, there was Senate Bill 1396, which was approved by the General Assembly. And one of the components of that bill is it gives the Department of Health the authority to include considerations for the impacts of climate change in our on-site sewage system regulations. So we're in the process of revising those regulations in total. They're 20 years old and it's time for them to get updated. But a significant part of our effort is going to be working with partners from all over the state and especially in coastal Virginia to look at how best to set up those considerations for the impacts of climate change moving forward. So I appreciate the opportunity and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks for the presentation. Any questions for Mr. Gregory? Questions? Ms. McClellan? Mm-hmm.
So I represent Norfolk, an urban area where we don't have a lot of this, but I was really shocked by the reporting. You said 40% of private wells have chloroform and a variety of other issues, yet there's no requirement for reporting. Is that something that would have to happen at the General Assembly, or how would that go into effect? I just worry about what's seeping into our ground and then into our beloved Chesapeake Bay.
Correct. So our authority for our private well regulations is construction and location. So we're regulating the location of where that private well can be placed and the manner in which it's constructed. But once it's installed and you've received your approval, we do require a bacteriological sample to ensure that the construction hasn't created some contamination of the water supply. But after that point, then it's up to the owner to conduct their annual or however frequent sampling that they feel is necessary.
Any other questions? What numbers are you seeing for system costs across the Commonwealth? Is it just vary terrifically by region, or is there some uniformity to them? Or
there's some uniformity. Obviously, Northern Virginia, there's a little bit greater increase in cost. For conventional systems, which is still roughly 90% of what we see, typically $8,000 to $10,000 range for a conventional system. Alternative systems previously was about $18,000. That's going up now. It's closer to $25,000, but those can certainly go up in the $30,000 to $40,000 range, depending on the site condition.
They're the figures we're hearing on the shore, about $25,000, $30,000 for the secondary systems. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next on our agenda, we have some member business. I believe there's some ideas and discussions that some of our members want to have. I believe Ms. McClellan, you had a couple of things you wanted to talk about.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Two items. The first is the concept that we have been working on at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, which I serve as chair in our legislative committee, the concept of a Virginia Commonwealth Flood Board. It's something that you should be familiar with, similar to the legislation that was introduced last year. Recognizing the need, as been mentioned earlier, for a statewide oversight and coordination, we have fashioned this in a white paper that is similar to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, but is focused on flooding based on floodplains and watershed regions, would have oversight over the funds coming right now through RGGI, but could be potential additional funds in the future from infrastructure dollars of the Commonwealth Flood Preparedness Fund, among other things. And I'd love to have the support of this entity. I think it does a nice job of addressing several elements within the JCOTS report, which, by the way, again, Dr. Goodall, I thought that was a great report. Really pleased with that information. So just wanted to bring that to the body. Hope that this would be supported. In terms of how this would be funded, which is always the big challenge in the General Assembly, would be through the RGGI funds, as noted previously by Mr. Glover. There's an administrative element of each round of funding. To date, if I did the math correctly, about $4.8 million of the first 2 quarters was reserved for administrative and consultants. And the way we have drafted this would look at about $2.5 million annual fund or annual requirement to staff and to provide oversight here. So I think it's a great idea. I hope others throughout the state and the General Assembly will also support it as well. But I think this would be a good start to address what I think is such a critical issue, and that's flooding statewide.
And so you would envision the board as providing oversight to DCR?
Yes, oversight of the fund, not oversight of DCR.
Right.
I would say
Yeah,
right now the fund is under DCR, so I would be in that context. Has a lot of different flavors. It's early on, so a lot of discussion on how this would ultimately look, but would basically be floodplain managers, climatologists, folks with financial elements. We need to make sure that we're really looking at it from an environmental lens. Would possibly also coordinate with hopefully an ongoing TAC. We recognize a need there as well, but it's very similar in nature to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which is a well-run organization that's governor-appointed citizen body to provide oversight to critical issue in Virginia.
There's a couple of other items here. Anybody else have anything they want to bring up to the committee?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, I put on the next item was the STORM Act, which is a federally funded revolving fund that ultimately will be funded hopefully through the infrastructure bill. Currently, while written into law by the last administration in January, has no funding, but would act like the EPA's Clean Water Revolving Fund and could provide some potential significant funding for the Commonwealth. I had a discussion earlier today about this and tried to do some fact finding, and what I found is it's sort of in beta version. FEMA has not written many rules around this so far, so I think just the committee should be aware of it, and wasn't sure if there needed to be any sort of legislative item for this General Assembly to be ready to accept those funds, and what I heard was it's not ready for prime time, so maybe the session after next.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any business they want to bring before the committee? Which sort of leads us along the lines of what Ms. McClellan was talking about. The next meeting, we're going to be scheduling a November meeting, and that November meeting, as has customarily been our practice, will be devoted to discussing legislative recommendations, legislative ideas, and things people may already have. Legislative members of the committee may already have things in the hopper. And if not, some of the things that we may want to have drafted and also to support. So be thinking about that, and we'll poll for the meeting in November. I know November is going to be a crowded month for all sorts of reasons, but we need to try and squeeze that in before the end of the year. Any comment? Sean, have you got any public comment out there? Nobody signed up for anything? Okay. All right. Okay. Anybody out there that wants to say anything in the audience? Any members of the public? All right. Well, I appreciate your interest, and I appreciate everybody's attention. Great presentations today. A lot of information out there. Great work on the Coastal Master Plan, and we look forward to hearing more as things progress. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.